Good afternoon. Today is Thursday, September 24th, and this video is to support the activity called Population Regulation in the Serengeti, an interrupted case study. So we're going to sort of walk through this assignment together. That's the way it's designed. So in class, we've been working together on this, and this is to help support particularly the virtual students to complete this assignment. So let me open up my screen, and you're going to go to your class's Google Classroom page. This happens to be second hours. And before we jump into the assignment, just a reminder, you have this on the stream page. We're on the stream. Look at my cursor. On the sidebar, you have upcoming assignments listed. That's what you need to check every day. You need to check that every day. Things change based on what happens in class. Once in a while, due dates get pushed back a day or two. I'll never move a due date up on you, but it is possible a due date slides back. So check this every day. I cannot stress that enough. So anyway, to get into today's assignment, which is based on EcPD-5, we're going to go to classwork, scroll down to ecology, and here's EcPD-5, HHMI population regulation in the Serengeti. And if I open that up, there are several links. There's a link directly to the PowerPoint, which I'm going to be sharing on this video. We're going to be looking at pieces of this video during today's lesson. And this is the document you need. So you're going to want to open up this document. You don't have to have any special code, just be logged into a Google account. Your school email should work, or your personal Google account. I'll go into my personal one on this one. And that's going to pop up the document that you need. Notice there are two blue buttons up top. You can save and stop and start again. Or if you finish, you can hit I am done. So let me just read the introduction with you briefly. So Serengeti National Park in Tanzania of Central Africa is a natural wonder, and research in the park has helped us learn about many important ecological processes. In this case study, it's based on a real set of scientific research that has been done in the Serengeti over the last 50 years. That's a case study. You will watch clips from the short film Serengeti's Nature's Living Laboratory, which explores the factors that regulate the park's animal populations. Throughout the activity, you will make predictions, analyze data, and answer questions related to the film. What you'll learn about the regulation of populations in the Serengeti can be applied to other populations throughout the world, and that's key. Yes, we're going to use the Serengeti as an example, but everything we've learned over the last 50 years at the Serengeti applies to every other ecosystem, including our own ecosystems right here in Michigan, which is where we'll be moving in a few days. So yeah, we're talking about Africa. We're talking about animals that are exotic that you see in Africa, but understand this works with all ecosystems and it works with all organisms. So this is just a good example of how this all works. So let me show you a little bit about the Serengeti. If I bring this up just a moment. So this is a sunset picture of the Serengeti. Serengeti is located in Africa. It is in the country of Tanzania. And right here is Tanzania in red. You can see it's located near Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Mozambique, Zambia. So it borders with a lot of different countries. And right here, this big lake, this is Lake Victoria, which you may or may not have heard of before. So we're talking about Tanzania on the eastern coast of Africa, Central Africa. And if we blow up Tanzania, take that way and blow up Tanzania, this is the country. So you can again see there's Kenya over here to the east, Rwanda, Zaire, Zambia, Mozambique. Up in the upper northeastern corner, right near Lake Victoria, there's Lake Victoria, this green patch here, that is Serengeti National Park. It's actually a very sizable park, 15,000 square miles. And this is sort of a blow up of the area, covers quite a bit of difference, or excuse me, quite a bit of space. Borders Kenya, shares a border with Kenya, and goes down along Lake Victoria. So, let me come back out of that. So now that we've exposed you a little bit to the where the Serengeti National Park is, question 1 in your document says, predict what type of animals you might see in the Serengeti National Park. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video and try to jot down 5 to 6 different organisms you predict you would see in Serengeti National Park. Go ahead, hit that pause button. Okay, welcome back. So we then had a discussion in class about what organisms you would expect to see. I'm just going to bring that up, sorry. So to bring that up, what types of animals would we expect to see? And so this is generated from one of our classes today. We said elephants and lions and rhinos, hippos, gazelles, zebras. What else did we have on our list? We had antelope. We had, sorry, I'm straining to see the board over here. We also had some smaller organisms like ants, snakes, giraffes aren't smaller, but giraffes, zebras. And these were some of the things that students earlier today predicted that we would see in the national park. So let me share with you a video that you'll see if we continue down the worksheet itself. It says to play the introductory video, video number 1. So we're going to play video clip number 1, and then we'll return back to this. It's about 2 minutes long.
I arrived as an undergraduate. This was the beginning of July of 1965. I got a lift down from Nairobi with the chief park warden. Next day, one of the drivers picked me up and took me out on a 3-day trip around the Serengeti to measure the rain gauges. And in that 3 days, I got to see the whole park, and I was blown away. I, of course, grew up in East Africa, so I'd seen various parks, but there was nothing that came anywhere close to this place. Serengeti, I think, epitomizes Africa because it has everything but grander, but louder, but smellier. It's just more of everything. What struck me most was not just the huge numbers of antelopes and the wildebeest in particular, but the diversity of habitats from plains to mountains, forests and the hills, the rivers, and all the other species. The booming of the lions in the distance, the moaning of the hyenas. Why was the Serengeti the way it was? I realized I was going to spend the rest of my life looking at that.
So there's your opening video. That was Tony Sinclair. He is the gentleman who began the research nearly 50 years ago and is still actively doing research in the Serengeti. So if we pop back over to this slide here. Oops, sorry, I must have hit something wrong. So he became interested in how, you've got a lot of different species on the Serengeti. Many of the ones you guys listed, you saw in the video. There are lots and lots and lots of different species. How do these populations not overgrow and just grow right over the top of each other? How do these populations stay in what we say check or in balance? What's happening that makes that work? And that's what he wanted to explore. So as we did in the Pogill, one of the things he looked at was the density and how density would impact populations, from low density populations to high density populations. And he was familiar with the biological terms of density independent and density dependent, which were discussed in the Pogill that we did. But he was also familiar with these terms called bottom up and top down, which we have not had a chance to talk about yet. So I'm going to share another very short video with you that will explain a little bit about the difference between bottom up and top down before we move forward. So I'm going to have to unfortunately change screens again just for a moment. And I'm moving over to the clip. Sorry, this is not super smooth. So this is going to explain bottom up versus top down. As you can see, just over a minute.
To consider the factors that might regulate the wildebeest, imagine an ecosystem as a pyramid. At the base of the pyramid are primary producers like plants that get their energy from the sun. Those plants are eaten by herbivores like wildebeest, which are in turn eaten by predators like lions at the top.
Wildebeest being at the middle of the pyramid, you could think of two things which could be limiting the wildebeest population growth. One would be food, because herbivores have to feed on plants, which is at the bottom of the pyramid. On the other hand, it could be from above, which are predators feeding on the herbivores.
When a population is limited by its food supply, we say that it's regulated from the bottom up. If, however, the population is limited by predators, we say that it's regulated from the top down.
So back when Tony Sinclair started his work in Serengeti, we didn't know a lot of this information. We were not super familiar with density dependent, density independent. Bottom up, top down has only been really come out the last 20, 30 years into our thinking. So hopefully that makes some sense about the difference. So bottom up means the food supply is controlling the size of the population. So in other words, this grasshopper bee population is controlled by how much food is available through the plant population. That's bottom up. Same idea, the amount of frogs available totally affects the snake population. That's bottom up. But if we go the other way, the hawk eats snakes and controls the snake population from getting out of control. That's top down. The snake population in turn eats the frog population, which keeps that from getting out of control. So you have two different forces. You have this bottom up pressure coming from the food supply, and you have this top down pressure coming from the predators. And those two forces continually push against each other to help maintain a stable population. So in your worksheet, on the second page at the top, there is a table. And I'd like you to take a moment and brainstorm some ideas about what factors would affect population size. So for example, what's one factor that might affect population size? Food supply, that would be a good option. So I'm going over here. If you need to, you can take a moment to read through here if you need to. This talks about bottom up and density dependent, independent. And in here, I'm going to put food. I've got to fix up these boxes a little bit, so don't get too worried if it doesn't look perfect. I will fix that. So I want you to come up and brainstorm at least 5 others. So this is a good time to pause me and go ahead and fill in the other factors. Go ahead, pause. Welcome back. Unfortunately, I can't have a conversation with you right now, so I'm going to assume that these might be some of the things you came up with. Food, water, temperature, predators, disease, precipitation, didn't spell that right. Let's see, what's another one that you probably came up with? Habitat. And those aren't the only ones you could have, but those are some of the key factors that would certainly either cause a population to increase or decrease. So then what they would like you to do is go through and identify whether each one is bottom up, top down, or neither. And then whether it's density dependent or density independent. So another place to give me a quick pause, and then we'll come back and check ourselves. Again, welcome back. So food is definitely a bottom up. Water also is a bottom up. We consume water, it is necessary for our survival. Temperature. Temperature is one of those that we would say neither. It's not a factor that is going to affect the population size directly. Predators, that is more of a top down. Disease, this one sometimes throws people a little bit, but disease really is more of a top down approach. The virus or the bacteria is acting almost as a predator or a parasite on the organism, and thus it's causing the death of the organism, which is more of a top down approach. Precipitation, I would say, is neither, and habitat, availability of habitat is more of a bottom up type effect. And then we would have gone through and identify these as density dependent or density independent. Remember, density dependent means the density of the population affects basically the health of the factor. Density independent, the size of the population makes no difference whatsoever. So food, that is density dependent. All right, so I'm going to abbreviate a little bit just for speed. Because if the population is more dense, it requires more food. If the population is less dense, it requires less food. It has an impact. Same thing with water. If your population is dense, you require more water resources. If you're less dense, you require fewer water resources. Temperature is density independent. The temperature in the environment does not change based on the density of the population. If all of a sudden we have a greater density of elephants in the Serengeti, that does not, sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once. That does not change the temperature. An increase in elephant density doesn't affect the temperature. A decrease in elephant density does not change the temperature. So that's why we say it's density independent. Predators are definitely density dependent. Denser populations, more food for more predators. That is going to affect the predator population. Less dense, less success for predators. Disease is definitely density dependent. As we said in class, for those that were in class, look at what we're dealing with right now with coronavirus. Our best solution is social distancing, less dense. Stay less dense, the virus has got less of a chance to spread. We know that if you have dense gatherings, dense populations, the disease is going to spread much easier. That's nothing new. There's a reason why most of the major outbreaks are in large cities, because large cities have very dense populations. It has nothing to do with whether you're a red state or a blue state. It's where the density is. And that's what's causing the spread of the disease. Precipitation, the density of population is not going to make it rain more or make it rain less. That is an independent factor. And habitat, that's going to be density dependent, because if you have a dense population, there's more need for more habitat. If you have a less dense population, there's less need for habitat. All right. So then we're going to go on to question 2 here in just a moment. All right. Let me go back to the slides. I wish this was a little bit smoother, but it is what it is, so we'll make it work. So here we are on our slides, and basically what we're asking you to do in this slide is fill in the chart, okay? Oh, natural disasters, fire is another one we could have put on our list if we wanted to. So now if we go to the next slide, boy, it's being stubborn here. If we go to the next slide, what we're talking about is we're going to follow the journey of 2 different herbivores. Right? 2 different herbivores. Herbivores, what's an herbivore again? That's right, herbivores eat herbs or plants. These are plant-eating animals. And 2 of the most significant plant-eating populations in the Serengeti are the Cape water buffaloes and the wildebeest. And those are the 2 that we're going to follow on our journey. In the case of the wildebeest, there's 2 types of wildebeest we'll be looking at. There's what's called the non-migratory wildebeest, which is a smaller population of wildebeest. And then there's a very large population of migratory wildebeest. What's it mean to be migratory? Yes, migratory means that they are going to travel from location to location to location. And in the case of the wildebeest, the reason they're traveling is they're following the food sources. It's seasonal. So they have a very large park in which they can travel, and they seasonally follow where the food's going to be, and they move around year round. They're migratory animals, as are many herd animals. So that brings us to our first question, which matches question number 2 on the handout. It's right after the chart you just filled in. So you're going to see there that there is a place to fill in your initial answer with an explanation and a place for a revised answer and explanation. So your initial answer is your first thought. You're just on your own. What do you think the answer is, and give a brief reason for that answer. No points are deducted for having wrong answers. Science is always taking in information, realizing maybe they were wrong, and changing information. We don't mind wrong answers as long as at the end we end up with the right information. So anyway, read this question, and on your paper or in your document, choose the answer and a brief reason why you chose that answer. Okay, should have had enough time. If not, you can pause. And then we would, if we were in person, we would have you turn to a partner or turn to a small group, and you guys would discuss your answers, and then you would have a chance to revise your answer if you wanted to. Unfortunately, we are not in a situation where we can do that on video. So I'll give you a little bit of discussion you might have. So predators don't work because predators are not bottom up. Predators are top down, so that would eliminate choice A. Same with parasites. Parasites are a top-down disease-causing organism. They are not bottom-up. Rainfall all right, sorry about that. I had a small problem that I had to fix real quick. So let me go back to where we were. So we're looking at this problem. And as I said, predators and parasites could affect the population because they could affect the things that feed on the herbivores, eat the herbivores, but they are top-down control, so those both would have to be eliminated. Earthquakes won't work because earthquakes are density independent. And so density independent factors are neither bottom up or top down. The correct answer in this case would be rainfall, because rainfall is going to impact plant growth. And since rainfall impacts plant growth, that's going to be a bottom up control because that's their food supply. So the correct answer would be C. So if you would like to revise your answer, you'll want to pause the video, change your answer, and give an explanation as to why you're going to change your answer. So then we go on to our next slide here. It says, what happened to the migratory wildebeest between 1958 and 1978? So about a 20-year study. So we're going to look at the migratory ones. These are the ones that travel around and move around. So we're going to share with you another video clip. Take me just a moment. The videos were embedded in the PowerPoint, but they're not responding properly.
The very first surveys of the buffalo in 1961 counted about 15,000 animals in the park. The next time they did that in 1965, they counted 35,000. For a large mammal, they just don't do that sort of thing. The idea is to follow the herd around and identify it by the... And so I became involved in counting the buffalo from that moment on, year after year, which required doing a lot of flying. Once a year, we had to fly across the whole of the Serengeti and count every single animal that we saw. And of course, these herds are quite big, so we had to take photographs, and then I counted the animals off the photographs.
Tony's counts revealed that buffalo weren't the only ones increasing. Wildebeest populations were skyrocketing too. Tony's PhD project was to figure out why. He learned that a virus called rinderpest had killed 95% of East Africa's cattle when it first arrived in 1890. And it had periodically decimated Africa's cattle populations ever since.
It turns out that wild animals that were closely related to cattle, like buffalo and wildebeest, they also suffer from this disease.
Tony discovered that a new vaccine to eradicate rinderpest from cattle had also eliminated the virus from the Serengeti's wildlife. The disappearance of rinderpest precisely matched the time when buffalo and wildebeest populations began to explode. This boom was an opportunity for Tony to learn what regulates these animals' numbers and the entire Serengeti ecosystem.
Okay, so we're going to return now to the slides and to the worksheet. So we are on part 2 of the worksheet in case you got lost. And so we just did what's described in the paragraph in part 2. We watched a video clip that talked about both the buffalo and the wildebeest populations and the impact of this disease called the rinderpest. And so at the bottom of the page there, you see a graph which is going to match our slides here in just a second. And so these questions are also on the worksheet as you go to the 3rd page. So it says, which symbol represents the number of wildebeest and which symbol represents the prevalence or percentage of wildebeest with rinderpest? And how do you know? So what does the colored dark circle represent? Which population? And what does the white box represent? And then how do you know that? Okay. So that's question 3. So I'm going to give you a moment to try to answer question 3. So which one represents the number of wildebeest? Correct. The dark colored in circles represent the wildebeest population. Therefore, the white boxes represent the wildebeest with the rinderpest. Because what was happening to the wildebeest with rinderpest? The wildebeest with rinderpest were dying. And so the population was dropping. So you can see from the late 50s to about the mid 60s, the wildebeest population was dropping significantly because of the rinderpest. When the rinderpest was brought under control, all of a sudden the wildebeest population didn't have that disease, that factor, that density dependent pressure pushing the population down, and wham, the wildebeest population took off and started growing pretty exponentially, as you see in the picture here. Computer's not being very responsive. Here we go. So here's our next question, which matches question 4 on the worksheet. The elimination of rinderpest impact the wildebeest population. What type of factor is rinderpest? Whoops, I might have accidentally given that away. But we'll take a minute for your initial answer with a brief explanation. So I'm going to pause for about 30 to 45 seconds. Okay, so you should have been able to make your initial response and given a rationale for your initial response. Again, you are not going to lose points if your initial answer was not correct. So please stay honest. So again, we would normally have you turn with a partner or a team and have a discussion as to which one you thought it was. So let's sort of go through the rationale. In this particular case, density independent top down. Well, rinderpest is a virus, and viruses cause disease, and the density of the population does make a difference. So the fact that they're saying it's density independent in A would eliminate A. Same thing with B. This is a density dependent factor because if the population is larger, it's easier for the disease to spread. And if the population is less dense or smaller, it's less likely the disease spreads. So that brings us down to whether it's got to be C or D. So is a virus coming from the bottom up, or is it coming top down? Was the virus affecting the food supply? No, it's not affecting the food supply. These are herbivores. This virus is not killing the plant, the food source. This virus is directly killing the wildebeest. That means it's somewhat like a predator. And I know it's a little weird to think of viruses as a predator, but it's somewhat like a predator. So C would be the correct answer. It's density dependent, and it's top-down control. That's what's going on with the rinderpest virus with the migratory wildebeest. Another question is number 5 on the worksheet. Looking at the same diagram, same situation. Consider the population growth curve shown. What type of growth is this? So particularly we want to focus on the wildebeest without rinderpest. Again, I'll be quiet for a moment so you can respond to question 5. Okay, so if we look at these options, again, we don't have a partner to talk to. The two types of population growth patterns are discussed in the POGIL that you should have already done. That POGIL was EcPD-5. And in there, they talked about exponential versus logistic growth. So it's got to be either exponential or logistic. There is not a linear growth or geometric growth that we use those terms in ecology. So you may recall exponential growth has sort of a J curve to it, and logistical growth has what's called an S curve. It starts out like a J and then it balances out. So what we're seeing here is not balancing out. This population is continuing to go straight up. If this was logistical, this population would grow to a certain point and then it would start to balance. This is not coming into balance. It is continuing to grow straight up. It's got that classic sort of J look to it. So exponential would be the correct response in this case. So there's a follow-up question, which on your worksheet is number 6. What would happen to the population in the long term? If nothing changed, what would happen to this population? And there's more than one possible outcome. See if you can come up with at least 2 of the 3 possible outcomes that could happen. All right, and again, we would have a short class discussion with our other students, but it's just you and me on a screen, on a video. So what could happen? Well, if this thing continues to grow, the problem is it could run out of resources. It could use up all the resources. If it use up all the resources, what's the result? The result is the population could crash. The population could have a sudden drop and just die off, crash. That's one possible outcome. Another possible outcome is it finally hits maximum resources and it levels out. Doesn't tell us what the carrying capacity is. We don't know what the carrying capacity is for wildebeest in the Serengeti. So maybe we haven't hit the carrying capacity yet. But once we hit the carrying capacity, it would then level out. So if we exceed carrying capacity and use up our resources, we're going to crash. If we hit carrying capacity and that brings us into balance, then we're going to level out and stay balanced long term. And somewhat the same is you could have, I said it could drop. So if it could have a small drop, small decline, whoops. But it also could have what's a steep drop, which is a crash. So it could be a gradual drop, or it could be a crash, or it could balance out. Those are sort of the things that typically would happen to a population that's experiencing exponential growth. So what happened to the migratory wildebeest in this particular case? Okay, so now we are going to move into part 3. So I'm going to stop this video. This covers parts 1 and 2, so it's not so long, you can break it up. And I'm going to post a second video that goes into part 3 and 4. So this should allow you to complete parts 1 and 2 of the handout. And there'll be a second video for parts 3 and 4.